Hey, what's going on? You know who it is. You know what it is. All right, you guys, peep game. So I had a chance to check out the Jeffrey Dahmer mini series, and I got to tell you, well, it is what it is. Looking at Jeffrey Dahmer and basically when it comes to case study and, basically analyze what type of person he was, Jeffrey Dahmer was just a sick fuck, and that's just basically the bottom line. Now, I'm going to be careful with what type of dialogue I use in this video because we all know that YouTube have their word police, that, if you use certain dialogue, then at the end of the day, they don't want to monetize the video and all that kind of stuff. And then you may have unwanted attention from, certain type of groups. And you just kind of don't even want that kind of traction. You don't even want that kind of, trouble on your channel. Not that you afraid of them, but you just don't want to be bothered with them. And that's just that's just the bottom line. Now, to make a long story short, we all know that Jeffrey Dahmer lived an alternative lifestyle. That's fact, that's documented. Okay, but what I found in this movie was there was a lot of signs that he was off. He got accustomed to taking people out when he was like in grammar school. He had caught, went to the river and took some tadpoles, and basically he tried to give them to the teacher. The teacher didn't want them, and basically she gave them to a student. The student took the tadpoles home. Basically he went into the dude's house and took the tadpoles back, and he poured oil in the jar, basically to try to, drown him. So, that's just what type of person he was. And there was just a lot of things, his demeanor, how he would look, when his dad was showing him how to, cut fish up and stuff. And then, he had an interest in, basically dissecting animals and stuff. So that's where it all started, which led to him growing up being who he was. He also had a short stint in the army. I don't know if he was dishonorable discharged or honorable discharge, but he had a short stint in the army. Didn't last. He went back to Milwaukee, but basically his first victim, he took him out in Ohio. And he buried him. And then based off the stuff that his father taught him, that's how he learned how to do away with the remains and all that kind of stuff. Like, dude had issues. So, the reason why it took them so long to catch Jeffrey Dahmer, and to be honest with you, he probably would have continued to get away with it if it wasn't for Tracy Edwards, the guy that got away from him, which I'll get to Tracy Edwards in a minute and why Tracy Edwards should possibly file a lawsuit against the people that made the movie for misrepresenting his character. He can do that. He could at least look into it. I'll talk about that later on. But I think one of the reasons why Jeffrey Dahmer was able to be able to commit these heinous acts is because where he lived at. He lived in he lived in what you would call a shady neighborhood in Milwaukee. He lived in what you call the we don't give a damn area. And where he lived, it was a lot of people that looked like me there. And there were so many signs, and basically they're also implying in the movie that they tried to report Jeffrey Dahmer. They said people were complaining to management about the smell. They said management really didn't want to do anything because they kept saying he was a good tenant. He always paid his rent on time and all that kind of stuff. Now, there is a scene in the film where there's a eviction notice handed to him. Now, I don't know how accurate that is. I don't know if that's accurate. But his next door neighbor, she always thought that he was off. And she kept saying, hey, You know, it's a strange smell and coming out that house. It's so strong to where, I almost threw up coming through the vents. And she would be saying, hey, I would be hearing people screaming and stuff. You know, he had turned the music up real loud. And, every time they'd say, hey, Jeff, there's a bad smell coming out of your apartment. I can smell it through the vents. He'd be talked about he got some bad meat and all this kind of stuff. So how they, the way they caught Jeffrey Dahmer, they just had overwhelming evidence that he was committing these acts. He had the people's identification. He had pictures. He had pictures. And I mean, this dude would be doing some sick stuff. Now, did they show the stuff that he was doing, which we know he was known for doing to his victims? Nah, not really. Were there any gruesome, kills in the movie? Not really. They would just show the imagery of what they look like, But I think two of the most disturbing parts in the movie was with the 14-year-old boy, the Asian kid, and then one of his victims was a deaf black man who lived an alternative lifestyle. He was deaf. He couldn't hear. But the 14-year-old, he drugged the 14-year-old. One of his tricks was he'd say he was a photographer, and he'd offer money to take pictures and all that kind of stuff. And then what he'd try to do is he'd give him beer, and then he would drug him, and then that would lead to him, basically doing the stuff that he would do. But what happened was, the 14-year-old kid, he tried to get away. He ran out of his apartment basically in his underwears. So, Glenda, the character played by Niecy Nash, was like, hey, something is wrong with him. Something's wrong with him. It's obvious he been drugged or something. There's a difference between being drugged and being drunk. Usually when you drunk, you talk a whole bunch of stuff. You slurring your word. This kid was in and out of consciousness. And what happened was when the police got there, Jeffrey Dahmer comes outside and say, hey, we're lovers and all that kind of stuff. He's 90 years old. Instead of the police saying, well, he looks intoxicated. And they're trained to detect these type of situations when something is unfamiliar. Now, of course, they can be in a ways where they just want to harass somebody, but they are trained to basically notice when something isn't right or adding up. And basically they just went by his word because, hey, he's a white man, because he's white and he says so. Instead of them saying, hey, well, can we see his ID? He said, oh, he's like 19. And, the black lady played by Niecy Nash, Glenda, said, he looks like a baby. And she called the police for months saying, well, did you hear anything? And he said, oh, he lives with me. And even they thought that was strange. So basically the police led him right back into his demise. I mean, just pure negligence by the Milwaukee Police Department. Now they're saying that those two officers was eventually suspended, but they eventually got reinstated. And they really didn't even want to do nothing to those officers. And they basically saying the only reason why they did anything to those officers because they got tremendous pressure by Jesse Jackson to do something. But yeah, they're saying that they tried to evict Jeffrey Dahmer, because they had got so many complaints to where they was just like the smell and all this kind of stuff. And then he tries to have somebody basically clean up the apartment. And first of all, if you got a big ass barrel in your apartment, that is cause for concern. This man had a severed, head in his refrigerator, when they arrested him. That's just real talk. So they supposedly tried to evict him before, leading up to his capture. But I don't know how accurate that is. But yeah, the neighbors complained. The neighbors saw people go in that house and never come back out. And when they would call the police, they would just ignore them. And that's why one of the characters was going out and say, "Hey, we kept calling y'all. Y'all did nothing. I called y'all for months and said something wasn't right about that dude." But yeah, Jeffrey Dahmer was one sick bastard. He really was, but he got what was coming to him. Now, let me get to the Tracy Edwards character. He should look into possibly sending his legal team after the makers of this film, and also Netflix, based off his character. Now, he testified under oath. I seen his testimony. It was like 30 minutes. It's on YouTube. They asked him, did he live an alternative lifestyle? He said no. He said he, was heterosexual. Said he did not live alternative lifestyle. He said he was straight. But in the movie, his testimony doesn't match with, where he said he met Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, he said he met Jeffrey Dahmer at a mall. He said he was with two of his friends. One was white, and the other was black. Now, nowhere in his testimony he said whether any of them was, what their preference was. But they have him meeting Jeffrey Dahmer in a alternative lifestyle club, and his two friends, both of them happened to be black. But he said one of the dudes that was with him was white. So that was some inaccuracy as far as the character go. And they portrayed his character as living an alternative lifestyle. But, you might want to look into that. But yeah, the overall movie, it wasn't as graphic as I thought it was going to be. But I learned some things. But then there were things that I already knew. Jeffrey Dahmer was a sick bastard. Do I recommend it? I mean, it's up to you. It's up to you. I ain't gonna say I liked it or whether I hated it. I just watched it. So basically I can give you assessment of the film. It's really up to you. But that's all I have to say. I'll just put it to you this way. If I went to see it at the theater and it was like a shorter version, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I'll just leave it to you that way. Anyway, it's your boy Town Biz. I'm out.